So I titled this Strategies for Success because a lot of times I think a lot of pre-med students, and this, I guess, is everybody here pre-med? Raise your hand if you're not pre-med. Everybody here wants to go to medical school? Fantastic. So that makes it really easy. I can just say pre-med the whole time, or medical school. So I get a lot of questions or a lot of assumptions, I think, from students about what it takes to get in. And so one of the biggest challenges I've had at UC Davis is doing a lot of myth busting and breaking up a lot of misconceptions that exist about what it takes to be successful. And so I think a lot of pre-med students, because it's a very, very anxiety-producing process, it's a very nerve-wracking process, it's very scary, you hear all the scary stats, this many people don't get in, you need these numbers, and there is not a formula to this process. So I want to put that out there first, and put that out there because that's going to be the guiding principle behind everything we talk about. I'm going to talk about holistic review and what that means and how that can benefit you. But behind all of this, there is a lot of strategy. It doesn't mean that anything is guaranteed, but there are things you can do to help with the process. But you will never, ever, ever find a formula that will tell you, if I do X, Y, and Z, I'm going to get in. That just doesn't exist. And that's partly because of the holistic review. So what does that mean? Before I left the medical school, I worked at a medical school before coming here, I used this chart all the time when I did presentations. I used to go all over the country and do these types of workshops for students at all types of institutions. And I always use this chart, I took it right from the same slides I used then, to talk about what holistic review means. You probably asked admissions officers, well, what if I have this number and I did this and this, what are my chances? And what's the answer they almost always give you? Huh?
You don't really know.
Well, honestly, nobody knows your chances, period. But you may have had some people say, well, we use the holistic review, so we're going to take your whole application into consideration. Has anybody heard that response before? I used to have to give that response, and it's really agonizing on the admissions side to have to try to answer that question. Because the truth is, nobody can tell you your chances. You can ask someone, you can tell them your MCAT, your GPA, you did this, it's all over the place. There's no way anyone knows what your chances are. But here's some of the secrets. So medical schools say they take all these things into equal consideration, right? You've heard that. So experiences, what you did with your time, attributes, and your metrics, your MCAT and your GPA. Now, that's an equal chart. You have 3 pieces of pie. It's supposed to be equal. Which piece of the pie maybe has a little bit more fruit in it, though? Which piece of the pie do you think people maybe take most bites out of? The metrics, right? So this is an equal pie. All things are considered equally, but unfortunately, metrics probably have a ever so slightly bigger role in the process. But with that said, every year doing admissions, I saw people who had 40 MCATs and 3.9 GPAs who were not accepted to any medical school. Not invited, simply not getting in. And so that proved to me, I'm thoroughly convinced, inside and out, that schools do use holistic review, because if that were not the case, what schools used to do before the holistic review was introduced is they would just take all the applicants, sort them, right, highest to lowest, draw a line, take the top people, and they'd be done with it. It was really simple. And then when you went to your interviews, they'd ask questions like, oh, tell me about yourself, or, oh, tell me about the research you did. It was really simple. It was more like getting to know you. As you probably have already heard, interviews now to medical school aren't that simple. They're doing a lot of very creative things because they're no longer interested in just what are your numbers. They're very interested in all those other pieces. So in terms of being balanced, it's no longer the case that you can have super high MCATs and the highest GPA, 3.7. That's not enough anymore. And I'm not saying you have to have that. That's just one piece of the pie. And we're going to talk about numbers. Now, you have to have, decent grades and a decent MCAT score. But now you also have to be what? What kind of attributes must you have? So these are some, right? This is not all of them. Please don't write all of this down because I'm not telling you, you don't need to say, I need to make sure I am all of these things. What's most important is that you actually know what your strengths are, that you know what your attributes are. So a lot of people assume that medical schools want what's like the biggest attribute everyone thinks they must have on their resume? Starts with an L.
Leadership.
Leadership, right? I've had students come in crying, I don't have any leadership and I'm applying next year and I don't know what to do. I'm going to take a deep breath first, because it's not that you have to have leadership. Leadership is one attribute that's valuable, but do they really want a class of all leaders? Have you been in a small group with all leaders? Does that work well? No, it's not usually a fun sight. So in addition to being a leader, what else could you be that would be equally as important in medicine?
Team player.
A team player, right? If you don't have a ton of leadership, if you don't identify as a leader, that's okay. What I would encourage you to do is to think about those strengths you do have and to really highlight your ability to work on a team, to communicate well with others, your ability to problem solve, your ability to find creative solutions, to think critically, to be a self-directed learner. There are a lot of other attributes that are going to be extremely valuable to the medical schools. But before you go, as you go on this journey, the first thing, I would argue, the thing that's going to guide you in terms of everything else you do is knowing which attributes you have and which ones you plan to highlight in your application. Because how are they going to know which attributes you have? Where in your application do they find these things out? Through what tools in your application? Personal statement. Sure, your personal statement, you can tell, well, I don't like people to tell people, look, I'm a good leader, or I'm a team player. We don't tell people things about ourselves. What should we be doing?
Experiences.
We show them. We can show them through stories, but also, it's not that you need to tell them you're a good team player. You said it over here. Remind me your name?
John.
John. So John is right. It's your experiences that are really going to convince them of those things. And you have, 700 words in your description and then 1325 characters in your meaningful experience section. So you get to show them your attributes when you write up what you did. That's your place to talk about those things. But if you're not being deliberate, if you don't first pick out your attributes and know what they are, and then if you're not using that to guide how you choose what you do, and you're picking things to do that will allow you to use your attributes and develop them and then show them, then you're sort of going about this haphazardly. And I would say you want to be a little bit more deliberate in the way you spend your time and choose and develop your application. So these are just some experiences. These are what I would consider to be a lot of, you've heard the term checklist applicant experiences. So we're going to talk about experiences in a few minutes. So going back to the holistic review, I have gotten a lot of questions from people about, well, if I had a weak GPA, let's say I started off in college and things were a little rocky, I had maybe some C's in my science classes, so my GPA is a little bit lower. What if I go out and I do a ton of experiences? I'm president of 4 clubs, I do every student-run clinic, I'm part of internships, I literally do everything I possibly can do. Can all those wonderful experiences then make up for a weaker GPA? What do you think? I think it depends. I really do. I think if by weaker GPA you mean like a 2.75, then I would say unfortunately probably not. I would say you probably still need to be at least at around the 3.0 mark to be in the game. So I have to have a lot of honest conversations with my students about making some big decisions in terms of making decisions about what you sacrifice. Maybe you need to sacrifice some of that other stuff and spend more time on your grades so that your GPA is higher. So I would argue that this is more, this is what it should look like. It's not that experiences will outweigh the grades. And it's not like just the numbers are heavier than the experience and the attributes. It's all this. You need to have everything balanced. So keeping in mind that I think this side tends to be a little bit heavier for most of the students I see. They're wonderful human beings. They have amazing attributes. They have great experiences, but maybe they didn't spend as much time developing this side than they had that side, or vice versa. You have really, really brilliant people. Everybody probably knows that really, really, really smart person who cannot talk to anybody, who has no people skills, shouldn't come in contact with humans. That can be a problem too, right? This can be really low, you can have really high numbers, and have never thought about who you are as a human being, and that's problematic too. So wherever you fit in, I would encourage you to strive for balance. Okay, so when I talk about being a checklist applicant, it sometimes evokes some anxiety because when you're not sure what to do in your first year of college, you do what you're told. You do what you read on the website. You do what your friends tell you, and you just do what seems right. And so a lot of students start off doing those checklist things. If you don't know what to do, you go and you shadow, you volunteer, you do the internships, you do research, you do the things that most pre-med students do. And there's nothing wrong with that. Except if that's all you've done, and if the only thing guiding every decision you've ever made over 4 years is what do the medical schools want to see, if that's what you had to ask yourself before making any decision about anything you've done, I would say it's a little problematic. Because I would want to know, what are you most passionate about? I don't want to know that you've done everything to make the med school happy. I want to know that you've chose to do things that define who you are, that show the med schools what you're all about. And you have to think about it from the other side. So if they have 6,000 applications, 6,000, right? Almost everybody in that 6,000 pool is going to be between a 3.0 and a 4.0. There's nowhere else you can go. There's only that range you can be in. So everyone in the 3.0 to 4.0 range is perfectly okay. They're all acceptable. Everyone's going to be in that certain range with the numbers. They're all acceptable. That's totally fine. So how else, where do you start standing out? If all 6,000 people did the exact same things, how do they pick people from the pool? Imagine you're reading 40 applications at a time. You open up one, the exact same application you read for the last 10 applications. As a reader, as a screener for medical school applications, what would you naturally do when you come across someone who, let's say, instead of shadowed, was the editor of their school newspaper and wrote health articles every week? Wouldn't you just kind of naturally be a little, gravitate towards that because that's just a little different? It just feels different, it's refreshing, it's interesting. So I would encourage you not to get sucked into this mold of what it means to be pre-med. And if there's something that you've always wanted to do, if you're really interested in something, don't not do that because you think it's not what the med schools want to see. You've got it all wrong. They're not looking for anything. They just want to know, who are you? That's the question. They want to know who you are. They want to know if you're cool. They want to know if you're easygoing. They want to know, does this person play sports, or is this person an artist? Do they play an instrument? Do they like to hike? Are they a runner? They want to know that stuff. Because before you're ever a doctor, you have to be a medical student at their school for 4 years. They have to teach you. They have to advise you. They have to shape and mold you into a doctor. That's their job. So you're not applying when you apply to medical school. You're not applying to be a doctor. You're applying to be a medical school student. And the admissions office is not there to pick you as a doctor. They're there to pick you as a student. And so you need to, just the same way you thought about your undergraduate application, you need to think about it in a similar way. What are you showing them about who you are as a person? Okay. So I find that a lot of students lose themselves in this process. And I really, really encourage you to be more competitive, to not lose yourself in this process. The more you can stand out in terms of being authentic. I'm not telling you to go out and fabricate crazy experiences just to stand out. But when you're authentic and you're passionate about what you've done, you will stand out because you'll be refreshing. You'll sound like yourself. Everything will align. So what makes a meaningful experience versus a checklist is when you're sitting in the interview and they say, so I remember, I always use the same example because I remember it from an admissions committee meeting. There was a student, checklist, done everything right? Everything right by what we would consider to be a good pre-med application. She had done research. The person in the interview said, tell me about your research. I see you did some research. However, she had done the research because she needed it to look good on her application to med school. Didn't really truly care about the research. She just did it. It was on her list. She checked it off. And when she got in the interview and they started asking her about it, because it was on her list, so we assume if you did it, that you cared about it, and her answer was a little lackluster. Her answer was just like, yeah, I did that, and when they started pushing a little harder, because they kind of knew what that research was about, and they started asking her more of the details and trying to muster up that natural enthusiasm for the things you spend your time on, it wasn't there. It was simply a checklist activity. And I remember the conversation in committee, and the conversation went, she's not passionate about the things she does. Done. Wasn't getting into med school, at least that med school, because she had done all the right things, but she didn't care about any of them. And then I remember another, and this was like, this was many, many conversations, but a student who maybe did very little clinical research or clinical activities, they did enough, just enough to show they know what a doctor does. But instead what they did was they went back to their community and they worked through community organizations, and they had created some type of fundraiser that either fed children or gave children something, and they did it for 4 years, and they raised money, they owned it, they developed it, it was their thing, they were passionate about it, it had nothing to do with medicine, there were no doctors around, but they really, really, when they talked about it, they said, oh, I see you did this clinical thing, or this community thing, tell me about that. That person got so excited, they just naturally got excited, 'cause that's their baby, they owned it, that the person was like, whoa, calm down. Like, they were like, this person almost came out of their seat. They were so excited about what they had done. Now, who is more likely to get into med school? The person who just talks about the things they did because they did it, they had to? Or the person, no matter what it is they did, maybe all you did was dress up like a clown and go into the oncology unit, the pediatric oncology unit, and perform for children every Sunday. Maybe all you did was make balloons for them. But you did that for 4 years, and you like being a clown, but you also like seeing children smile, and you were in the clinical setting. Whatever it is that is you, maybe you're a basketball player, and you didn't want to give up basketball, so you went and you coached basketball for elementary school, or you gave free piano lessons to children in underserved communities, or you tutored, or whatever. It doesn't matter. That's the point. There's no right or wrong way. But whatever it is you do, when I ask you about it, I want you to get excited, naturally. And we can tell the difference. And that's the difference between a meaningful and a checklist activity. If you love something, you're going to spend a lot of time doing it. Right? If you love something, you wouldn't stop doing it. You wouldn't want to stop doing it. So you would have done it for longer than a week or longer than 2 months. And so I want you to think really hard about how many people have gone abroad and done one of the mission trips for a week or 2 weeks. Anybody do that? Okay, so I want you to think a little bit about that in terms of whether you had thought about using that as a meaningful experience. It's okay that it was meaningful, but I want you to think about it from the perspective that it was just 1 week, right? It was only 1 week of your life. Did you have a huge impact on that country or that community in 1 week? Or did that community have a huge impact on you? And it's all about how you frame it. So if you're really honest with yourself and realistic and grounded in terms of the impact you had in 1 week somewhere, you can still use that as an effective way to talk about what excited you, but I would strongly encourage you not to take on a superhero persona and say that you changed something in a week, and instead talk about the impact that those individuals or that experience had on you as a human being, which would be much more powerful, I would expect. And then again, it comes back to your motivation, asking yourself why you're doing this. If someone comes into my office and says, what should I do for the next year, or what should I do this summer? My default answer is going to be, what do you want to do? There is no right or wrong thing to do. What do you feel like doing? And if it's between 2 or 3 things, I'll say, what do you want? When you think about what excites you, what do you want to do? They'll end up finding that answer. Well, I know I should do research. I feel bad quitting. I've been with my PI for a year, but it's so boring. I hate it. But I really want to go on this snowboarding trip where we teach kids from this community how to snowboard. Done. It's a no-brainer. If that's what you want to do, that's what you should do. Whatever it is you do defines you. You put that on paper and you say, take it or leave it. Take it, preferably, right? But that makes that who you are. So, and the other thing, probably some of you have heard me do this. So why do you want to be a doctor? I've done this all over the country. I've asked this question everywhere. What's the number one reason nationwide for wanting to be a doctor? I just love helping people, right? So if you're going to make that big claim, you're going to put that all over, you're going to say it, it's going to be your t-shirt, I love helping people. So then you need to look at your experiences on your sheet, and you need to ask yourself, which of these show that I love helping people? In what situations have you helped anybody other than yourself? Like, I would argue something like this internship, is it helping people? No, this is helping yourself, right? So you need to see, what have I done that helps people? because that's what you're saying you want to do for the rest of your life. And that can be also a way to guide your decision making in terms of how you spend your time. And so this all kind of comes down to defining who you are and creating a brand in your application, creating a theme in your application. I ask a lot of my students, who are you? If you just had to tell me who you are in a sentence, because again, that's what they want to know. Who are you? And sometimes, especially with some of the first and second years, I get like that blank stare when you hear the blinks, like blink, blink. Like, what do you mean, who am I? That's a crazy question. So I want you to think about that, and how would you show that to someone if that's all they're after? If that's all they want to know about is who are you, how would you show that through your experiences, through your letters of recommendation, through your essay? And so it doesn't have to be that everything is the same, but if you're thinking about this deliberately, you can pick things. You can pick people you spend time with to get letters from. You can pick your experiences. You can think about how your previous life experiences outside of your checklist activities have shaped who you are, and have that come together in an essay that shows how they all connect, so that you can find a theme that synthesizes. Maybe you came from an underserved community and now you're working in a student-run clinic where you're serving that same population. Well, suddenly things are starting to make sense, right? You found a connection between your personal life and the things you're doing with your time. Maybe you had a relative who had a genetic disorder and now you're doing research in a lab that's studying a genetic disorder. You may or may not even realize some of those connections between your past and what you're doing now. But if you can make that connection, find that, and use that to synthesize that in an essay, it's going to be very powerful. You're going to make that connection for the reader, and you're going to reveal a lot about yourself, your personal life, your background, your history, where you come from, all of that. Who can tell me what the word distance traveled means from a medical school perspective? Has anybody heard that phrase before, distance traveled? You have? Anybody brave enough to say what it means? We're not talking about globally. Yeah.
I like who you were at the beginning of your journey into medical school, and like who you've become since like completing all of your activities.
Yes, sort of. Let me put it in a different way. Let's say somebody comes from a household with 2 physician parents who have been went to the best elementary schools in the country, had private tutoring anytime they struggled, sent to all the best summer camps, all the science activities, all the tutors, all the piano lessons, everything lined up in life from the very beginning of time. Know they're going to be a doctor from age 2. Everything has been put in place for success. When that person reaches success, it's sort of expected, right? Everything's been put in place to make sure that that happens. And so the distance between where you start in life, what you've been born into, and reaching success the distance is short. It was there for you. It was all lined up. If you take someone else who was born in a situation where neither parent had gone to college, maybe the parents didn't even graduate high school, maybe the parents don't speak English, maybe you moved to this country, you learned English yourself, maybe you had some challenges you overcame, maybe money at home was tight from the beginning of time, maybe there were no summer camps, maybe instead of summer camps you were taking care of your siblings. Whatever the situation is, the challenges, the obstacles that person has overcome to do well in school and to get to that point of applying, it was a little bit of a bumpier road, right? It was a little bit longer. Maybe it literally took longer, but if it didn't take longer, the work and the time and the energy and the sweat and the grit was definitely more. It was there. So the distance traveled from the med school perspective is how far did that person come to get to the same level of success? And that's important. So I find a lot of students want to gloss over their background. They want to gloss over the details of their childhood, the details of where they come from, and I would encourage you not to do that, because that's part of what they're looking for. Whatever it is your background, whether you come from what would be called a privileged background or not, don't gloss over that. Tell them what it is. You're not going to be discriminated against one way or another, but they want to know what that looks like. Okay, so I'm going to shift a little bit. Does anybody have any questions so far about anything I've said that's more of the personal development, preparing for med school? Crystal clear? Everybody completely agrees? On the same page? Okay. So I didn't know if anyone yet has gone through some of the logistical stuff with you. Have you gone through an application logistical stuff yet? Yes, no, not so much? Okay. I included this because, again, this is stuff I do all the time on campus, and I figure if my own students don't know it, maybe others don't know it either. So we'll go through some of the logistical application stuff. So how many people are applying right now? Anybody in the application cycle? All right, very good. So this will be a little bit of a review for you. Anybody coming up next year? Who's applying next year? And anybody 2 years out? Okay. So for those who are next year and 2 years out, this is for you. Pay attention for a few minutes. So in terms of a timeline, you wouldn't be working on your essay for medical school, I would say, by January of the year you're applying. You do not want to start your medical school essay in April or May. You're going to be doing a lot of things in April and May, and the last thing you want to be worrying about is trying to write, for the first time, a medical school essay. Write your first draft in January, and make sure that over those 5 or 6 months, you have lots of time to visit lots of specialists, writing centers, your pre-health advisor, good friends who know you, who you trust, medical students you know, mentors. But it's going to take you time, and so don't neglect that piece of your application. It's a huge piece, and it takes time to develop a good piece of writing. So start that in January. By March, you need to have a sit-down conversation with your letter writers. So most medical schools are going to look for 3 letters of recommendation, at least, some 4. Some will cut you off and say no more than 4. Some won't cut you off, they'll say however many you want. How many letters are the med schools obligated to read?
3.
0. There's no legal obligation. They don't have to read anything in your application. So if you give them 7 letters, how many might they read?
1.
We have no idea, right? So we don't know. They may read 3, they may read 1. I doubt they're going to read 7. I really do. Maybe from beginning to end, maybe all 7 will get read, but probably not by the same person. So they're spending about 4.5, 5 minutes on your application for the first read to determine your interview. So for letters, quality over quantity. You don't need to have 7 letters to prove that 7 people think you should go to med school, especially if one of those letters is mediocre. One mediocre letter can be the end, right? If they open only 3 letters, or they open only 1 letter, and they just so happen to open that one mediocre letter, they're done. So quality over quantity. By March, you need to have your sit-down conversation with those people, with your packet, with your essay you've been working on, and ask formally for that letter of recommendation. That gives you time. If you sense from the person like, this isn't going so well, they're saying no, or you're just not sensing they're going to write you a strong letter, then you bow out gracefully and you go to plan B. But that's good to know before, you get that going in March. April, you're working on transcripts, you're making a decision. Am I going to hold for spring grades, or am I going to submit? If you're out of school, no problem. You're requesting your transcripts as soon as May 1st opens. You go into AMCAS and you create your application, your account for that cycle. Then you can print out your transcript request forms. You can take that directly to your registrar, or some registrars do e-submission. You go in, you submit your transcripts right away, early May, because at least they're there. You can submit transcripts before you submit your application. They'll keep them and hold them. So over May, that's when you're working, that's when you're doing all the work, right? Here are a couple things you're going to do before May. You're going to start creating your school list. And this is something I find some students spend a lot of time on, and other students get to the very end, their application is done, and they look at me and they're like, now where do I apply, Joanne? I'm like, wow, so that's a huge thing. I can't tell you where to apply. There are 142 now medical schools, and they're all different. And so you need to know where you want to go to med school. It's not something you randomly check off names. I can do a whole hour presentation on choosing medical schools. So you need to do your research. I'll give you some general tips. How many California applicants here? Anybody not from California? Okay, so if you're from California, you can list all the California schools. Those will be your REACH schools. And then you list some other out-of-state schools. And I would say the other out-of-state schools, I would probably focus on privates. Out-of-state private schools they're definitely more interested in geographic diversity and creating balanced classes. So a lot of private schools will strive for a 50-50 in-state, out-of-state percentile. So that helps you a lot. Some things about out-of-state state schools. How many people know what WICHE and WHAM is? Anybody heard of that? So there's an agreement. There are two states in our country that don't have any medical schools. And so the West Coast medical state schools have agreements with those two states that say that any out-of-state, any of those students, let's say from Idaho, who apply to their medical school will in some way be considered or given preference. I don't know if it's that strong of language, but they will take into consideration those states' applicants before the others because those states don't have a medical school to go to. So for example, if you have University of Washington or Oregon or some of the California state schools, any out-of-state applicants that they're accepting, they're going to be looking first at those two states. So that makes it challenging for California applicants to apply to West Coast state schools because all their out-of-state seats are probably going to be filled predominantly by those WICHE and WHAM agreements. So that's why I encourage you to do private schools because you can try. I'm not telling you you can't, but it does make it more challenging. So if you're not from California, same thing, apply broadly. East Coast is great for having a lot of private schools. Anybody been to the East Coast? Okay. That's great. You want to make that connection with the schools when you apply. You want to let them know you've been to that state or to that area or you've been out of California. Because it's somewhat not, this isn't true for every med school, but sometimes some med schools on the other side of the world, they think that as a California applicant, you don't want to leave California. I don't know why they think that, but for some reason they think that California applicants don't want to leave California. Any idea why? Any idea why they think that? So they assume that you'd rather be in California and that you're only applying to them as a safety school. So let's say NYU, let's say you're a strong applicant. You apply to all the California schools and you put NYU and Columbia and Yale and some other big name schools. You have good numbers, right? So they're thinking, well, if this person is going to get into a California school, if we accept them, are they really going to come all the way to New York? They're asking that question, right? Now, what if you do want to go to New York? You want to tell them that. You need to make it very clear that you want to be in New York. Otherwise, they may assume you don't. Because nobody likes being anybody's second choice, right? You don't like being the backup. So you need to make sure that in your applications, it's a little bit more apparent that you're willing to leave California, and that can help you. Having left California is a huge thing. If you have left California, spent any amount of time outside of the state, let them know that, especially if you've been to their state. If you haven't left California and you're looking for something to do over a summer, or you want to do something exciting, go on an adventure, I would strongly recommend you do that. Go on a trip. Go to New York, and while you're in New York, make appointments with all the med schools in New York, whoever will let you in, and say, hey, I'm coming from California to visit New York. Can I come visit your med school? Can I talk to some of your students when I'm there? I'm going to be applying next fall. And then you're in their system. Then when you go back and you apply, you can say, hey, I visited your school last fall. Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. I love everything about your school. Can't wait to be there. Yes, sir.
Is this more of a secondary kind of thing?
Yes, and interviews. But you can, secondaries, they oftentimes give you that option to say a lot of things, really.
Is it considered preemptive to schedule like a tour of a medical school like while you've submitted applications but haven't heard back from them yet?
A lot of med schools have open houses or info sessions. You can go do those, but a lot of med schools are not going to give you a private tour.
Okay.
Just because of the general school. But I would say if you go online and you visit their websites and you see info sessions or open houses, I won't say what I think you are if you don't go to that, but I think you should definitely go and visit the schools. You should make every connection humanly possible. So if you're coming to the conference this fall, and you're going around to that fair, you need to make connections. You need to shake their hands. You need to talk to them, take their card, and then when you do apply to their school, write in the secondary. When I talk to people used to do this time. When I talked to Joanne Snapp at the table at the UC Davis conference, I learned that blah, 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 blah. Make the personal connection because there are so many applications, they really want to, you're just going to stand out if you have any type of connection to the school. If you've just created a simple, like an application that speaks to them in no way, it's easy for them to pass by. It's easy for them to click next. All right, so that happens in May. You create your AMCAS. There is this myth that you must submit on June 2nd or you won't get considered, and that is simply a myth. I would argue anytime June is fine. You don't want to go too far past June. That starts to become problematic. In June, let's say you submit June 2nd, your application will be verified by June 15th, and then what happens? Anybody in that situation? You're verified? What's happening?
You just wait for
You're just sitting waiting, right? So you can submit on June 2nd or June 10th. You're all in the same pool. You're going to sit there and wait, and then the med schools are going to see all the applications that come in on July, whatever, 2nd or 6th or whatever it is this year. But see, 4th of July weekend, they're not reading anything before 4th of July weekend. They're going to come back after 4th of July. And you also have to consider that that month of July, when you're eager for them to start reading, they're still finishing up the previous year's application cycle. So they're still accepting people for that incoming class. So while you're extremely excited and ready to go, what are they feeling? They're like, oh my gosh, we just finished. I cannot believe we have to do this all over again. So, and they're taking vacation in July, right? They just finished. They're preparing for orientation. Admissions is like, this is my time to take some time off before I start over. So as soon as you hit submit, some schools will start sending you supplemental apps. Some schools will wait till you get your application verified. Some schools screen for SUPs. Some schools put numbers. They won't send you a SUP unless you have a 3.0 and a whatever range in your MCAT. So you need to know that. As soon as you get SUPs, you can start submitting. But they're not going to read your application until it's verified, your SUP is submitted, and all of your letters are in. So you can have your SUPs in, but they're not opening it until your letters are in. So there's really not a huge rush if you have any of those pieces that aren't in yet. Okay. So people don't tend to become complete until the end of July. That's typically when everything falls into place and the review starts. So submitting on June 2nd doesn't mean you're going to get read on July 6th. Do you have a question? No? Okay. So what happens is it takes 2 to 4 weeks to verify. They get them in July. They receive them. They send out SUPs. As SUPs come in, I would say a week is reasonable to turn around a SUP. I know some people have told students that 24 hours is ideal. When I see people rushing to submit SUPs, what I see is mistakes. I see typos, I see people using the wrong names, like referring to the wrong school in the application. And you may think like, I would never do that, but it happens. It happens more than you would think. Because when you're in a rush, think about that. You apply to 25 schools. The day you're verified, a lot of those schools have automated systems that are going to send you the SUP. So what's your inbox going to look like on that day you become verified? 25 SUPs are going to come to you, with 25 unique username and passwords, with 25 different systems to log into, with 25 different sets of questions. And you're going to feel overwhelmed. And so you're going to be rushing, especially if you're operating with this mentality that you got to turn this around in 24 hours. Okay? You don't. A week, 2 weeks, okay. So take your time, make sure your SUPs are well edited, make sure you've looked over them, have other people read them. They're just as important as your essay. They're part of your application. And then they come complete in August, and then they start sending invites out in August. And I think you had an MMI session last week, right? So that was probably really helpful. Yes?
So, I guess I've heard that you should submit your MCAS as early as possible because it's accepted on a rolling basis. So, is that not true?
Well, that's what I'm trying to say, is that early is June. If you were submitting in September, that would be really late. But if you submit June 2nd, they're not reading your application any sooner than they're reading the people who submit on June 10th, because they're going to come in a bulk. So they're all going to come in on July 6th, whether you submitted June 2nd or June 10th or June 15th. If they get verified in that 2-week period, they're all going to come in on July 2nd. And they're going to be sitting there in this big pile, and they're all going to get sent SUPs at the exact same time. It's just a button they click. They all get sent SUPs, and then they get read in the order in which the SUPs are submitted. And so it also then depends on letters of recommendation. You could have submitted on June 2nd, but if you don't have a letter writer who's submitted yet, you're not getting read. So I guess all the stars would align if you submit on June 2nd, you turn your stuff around in 24 hours, your letters are in, your MCAT score is in, and then you might be the very first person to be read. But do you think also that the med schools want to fill every single interview seat with the very first group of people who submit? I really don't, and my experience was no, they don't. And so they're going to be reading every application, and they're going to take every application, they're going to take the people who they want to take. Whether you submit on the first day or the 20th day, if they like you, they will invite you. And if they don't like you, even if you submitted on the first day, they will not invite you. They're looking to create a class. They're not just filling classes. Does that make sense? So I know this goes against some of the things you've been told before. I am still encouraging you to apply early, and by early I mean in June. I would not encourage you to apply in July or August or September. I've seen what happens to late applicants. They can be fantastic, but sometimes the interview spots fill up. But they're not filling up 1,000 interview spots in that first wave, I promise you. All right, so for those people going straight through, this is what the timeline looks like. We talked about this, and one thing I just want to emphasize is that if you do go straight through, when you submit in that spring before your senior year, it takes a snapshot of your GPA so you don't get your senior grades in there, and you're finishing this application cycle, the interviews and traveling and all that, while you're finishing your 4th year of college. And so I want you to think about that in terms of the classes you take in your 4th year. If you're going to be skipping classes all the time to go to interviews all over the country, which is what you want, right? Think about your schedule that year, and think about how flexible you're going to be or not be. This is what a gap year looks like instead, which this is all done when you're not in school, which makes it a lot easier. And so I get asked all the time, what should I do during my gap year? I just throw out some ideas. These are things I tell my students. There is no right or wrong way to do it. You just need to do something meaningful. As long as you're not working at a restaurant, hanging out on the beach, you should be good to go. A lot of people do AmeriCorps, Teach, Peace Corps, travel, scribe, EMT, research. It doesn't matter. Just you need to be doing something. I wouldn't take a whole year and say you're studying for the MCAT. Most people don't study for a year. Any questions about gap year? Anybody have any questions about what a post-bac is versus a special master's program? All good with that? Okay. Anybody have any questions about what's required for med school? Yes?
I have a quick question. When you say special masters,
Uh-huh.
what are you referring to?
I am talking about the master's programs that are designed to get you into medical school.
Okay, I would like to know how that's different.
Okay, so there are different, obviously a lot of different types of graduate schools or master's programs. The difference between a special master's program and, let's say, an MPH. So a special master's program is a money-making industry that is simply to help you get into medical school. This is something that I would typically recommend to students very individually. It's not something you plan for unless it's something you want to talk to your advisor about. Here are the situations where I might recommend a special master's program. If you have, let's say, a 3.3. A 3.3 is too high for post-bac. And let's say a 3.3 is sort of below average, but good enough. Like you could get into med school with a 3.3. You could, lots of people do. But it might be for some people, with the whole application, it might mean that they're not as competitive as they need to be. In some cases, I might recommend a student go ahead and do a special master's program before applying. If everything else in the application was extremely strong and I believed that they might be successful despite the 3.3, I would tell them to go ahead and try applying, and if they don't get in that first year, to then go do a special master's program to enhance the application. If you don't get in 1 year, you're going to have to do something to enhance your application. You have to do something different to add to it. And so if you do everything up front, it might be challenging if you don't get in to then find something else to do. So reserving the special masters for that gap year if you don't get in is a strategy.
And that's a year-long program?
It's a year-long program. All science, you're in classes with first-year medical students. So you're proving that you can handle medical school. That's the idea. You don't get to transfer it in. You don't get to skip the first year of med school when you go. You redo it. It's simply to show the med schools that, yes, I can handle medical school curriculum. Now, the catch is, if you go do that, what must you do when you get there?
Do well.
You have to do well. If you get to the first year of med school and you come out with C's, it really wasn't going well. And your advisors there, I've heard the advisors for these programs say that if a student gets in that program and has C's, they actually talk to the student about maybe taking a break and going and doing something else for a little while because they're not ready to be there yet. So not that they're kicking you out, but they may recommend, since it's $50,000, to find something else to do so you're not just spending money. Other ideas would be like MPHs or a master's in something else, global health or biology. Keep in mind, a master's degree will not touch an undergraduate GPA. So if your GPA isn't at a 3.0, you would not want to do a master's. You would want to do a post-bac. So if you have an interest in public health, a public health degree is not going to show the med schools that you can handle medical school curriculum. That is simply to show them that you have an interest in public health, which is fine. That's great. And if you want to do it before you go to med school because you just want to spend some more time being not stressed out as much before you get into the thick of things in life, that's totally fine. Some people choose to do it before. They just want to extend, life a little bit longer before going to med school. Some people choose to do a joint MD, MPH, or do an MPH after. It doesn't matter. But if you choose to do that, that's a completely different reason and purpose. So the grades for the MPH will still be considered, but not in the same way that a special master's program. They know if you're doing a special master's what your intent is, to prove you can do it. Any questions on any of that? Yes, sir.
When you're talking about GPA, are you talking cumulative or like the science-related courses in med school?
Initially, both, but most schools screen for cumulative overall undergraduate GPA, which would include post-bac work. So the averages that schools boast, whatever they put on their website with their averages, that is the overall GPA. So if you were coming in with a 2.99 overall undergraduate GPA, what would you do to their average for that year? You'd bring it down. And what are med schools really, some med schools, what are they really, really interested in maintaining? Their U.S. News and World ranking, their stats, their all of that. So it's not that, again, this is not about thinking you can't handle it. It's not about that. They know you're wonderful people. They know you can do it. There's just a lot of other things that are driving decisions on the back end that we're not always aware of. Well, now you are. Any questions? Okay, so we talked, for psych and soc, I just want to point out for the sociology, psych, it's just, has anybody taken the MCAT, the new one? No. Nobody's taken the new MCAT? You have? Okay. So from what I've heard, I've sat in on a few of the test prep things. The psych section is straight up intro psych. It's who did what and when. You need to know who did behaviorism, who is Piaget, what are the learning theories. But for sociology, it's a little bit more complicated. It's not just sociological theory. It's a couple things. So you need to have a really good understanding of social determinants of health. If you have no idea what I mean by that phrase, I strongly recommend you Google social determinants of health and know that inside and out. So that's about health disparities, health equity, healthcare equity, access, understanding all of that. Who has access? Why are some people healthy? Why are some people not healthy? But then they also have a lot of charts, a lot of research. So they'll give you some stats, and you have to try to synthesize content from multiple areas and draw conclusions based on statistics. So having a really good foundation in statistics will help you, but the sociology classes I would recommend would be anything related to health and any type of like research methods or class where you get to actually read research and then draw some conclusions from it. So practicing that skill. Any other type of prep would include reading. So if you look at the numbers, humanities majors score higher on the MCAT than science majors. Why is that? Critical reading. If you're a philosophy major, you're given a really dense piece of writing and you have to figure out what it says really quickly. How many science majors in here? Raise your hand if you read all the words in your book, all the chapters that are assigned to you. Exactly. So I'm finding that to be true, that most science majors don't do a ton of reading. They take a lot of notes, they write the PowerPoints, they print the PowerPoint slides, but you're not necessarily reading a really dense text and trying to figure it out on your own. You tend to rely on the PowerPoint slides to explain it for you. So I would encourage you to think about taking some philosophy classes, some type of class that requires you to do some dense reading and practice reading quickly, and also sitting for 7.5 hours reading. Anybody do that for fun right now? Sit for 7.5 hours? Couple people? Okay. So the feedback I'm getting from students is, I tell my students this, when you're approaching the MCAT preparation, the first thing I want you to do is get your hands on a practice test, lock yourself in a room, and set the timer, do it exactly the way you would on test day, but see how far you can get in 7.5 hours before your body literally starts having a physical reaction to sitting for 7.5 hours. Because the test isn't just a content test, it's an endurance test. And you need to give your body lots of time to practice sitting for that long and staying focused. You wouldn't run a marathon by running 2 miles here and 2 miles there. You practice by running long distance over and over, building up to the total amount. And then you'll have some endurance on test day, but you really have to train your body to stay focused for that long. I put this up there. I always like to point out that you have 3 options when it comes to medical school. Most people I talk to default to allopathic, but there are some really wonderful opportunities with osteopathic and podiatric that if you are not aware of what those other 2 are, I would strongly recommend. Yes, ma'am?
I just have a question about sociology and psychology.
Yeah.
If you've studied it before, do you have to take classes in college on specific sociology?
No, it's not that they're required. It's that it's on the MCAT. So if you feel really confident in psychology, I do the diagnostic exam and see how well you do in that section. And that's the other thing. If you do the diagnostic exam first, you can do some directed studying. You're not kind of just randomly studying things. But you can also get the content. If you Google MCAT 2015 AAMC, they have about it's like 40, 50-page document that outlines the concepts on every portion of the MCAT. So you can read through that and say, I have no idea what this is talking about. Maybe I need to go learn that again. Okay. Any questions? I ended a little bit early. I have an activity we can do if we don't have a ton of questions. Do we have any questions in general about strategies? Yeah.
When you're talking about meaningful versus checklists, if you did something for research and you just didn't like it, but you did it, is that okay to say yeah, I did this, but I just my heart wasn't in it, but I tried it out and it just
Absolutely.
Isn't for me?
I would say if you did research, you don't love it, to say, I wanted to learn some of the skills that research offers. I wanted to learn what research is, but yeah, to be honest and say, I stopped doing it because I didn't love it. What does that say? Okay, they don't do things they don't love. That makes sense. And what did you do instead? That would be the next question. I think research offers really great skills, but it's not for everybody. Yeah.
Sorry, I kind of going to be a dead horse here, but regarding the way your application is processed, so you turn everything in in June, and then you mentioned that then if your letters are in and you turn your steps in, that's when they look at your whole application.
Yes.
So your application isn't even open until after you turn in your secondary.
That is correct.
So then how are secondaries chosen? Is it just a metrics filtering?
Yeah, so they have computer systems. Most schools have, very few schools do anything manually now. So they have these systems, these application systems that you come in, the application system checks. They have programming set up to check. Let's say they screen for a 3.0 and a 50th percentile on the MCAT. They'll check that in the system. If you meet that, the system will automatically send you an email that says, you've been invited to submit the secondary application. Here's your username and password. Go in and submit it. You go in, you submit it, you do all the stuff. You get an automatic email that says your application is complete. Or it might say, thank you for submitting your SUP, but we're still missing one letter of recommendation. And then it's up to you to follow through. When your application is complete, when you have 3 letters, your MCAT and your SUP, you will get an email that says your application is now in review. It'll take 10 to 20 months to read this. Thank you so much for being patient. And then on the other side, they'll get a signal or not. They'll just have you on a list then that says this application is complete and ready for review. And that's when they would take that and assign it to a screener. But all those things have to be in place before anyone. If they're opening it because you call and you have a question, but they're not going and opening applications before it's complete. there's just too many. There's too many people. What would they open it for, I guess? So when you're complete, and that's what's really sad sometimes, people will submit their SUPs, they'll have everything in, and they're missing one letter, and they'll go through the whole cycle and not get reviewed because they didn't complete their application. Despite emails and sometimes things like that are out of your control. That's why I'm telling you, that's why that timeline I said start early. Do this all early. Start in March. Make sure things are secured. Sometimes letter writers will say yes to you in person, and then you don't really feel confident with that yes, and then it's true, they end up not following through. So be thinking ahead of time. What are plan Bs? What are some contingency plans? Who else can I be developing relationships with? Hopefully you have multiple people that you've been developing relationships with so that you're not relying, like it's not a scramble just getting 3. We hope. Yes?
Do most schools nowadays screen beforehand, or is that just?
Not most. So a lot of schools will actually send you SUPs before, not a lot. Some schools will send you SUPs before they're verified. If they're sending you SUPs automatically, what are they collecting?
Money.
You're contributing to their scholarship fund, right? They're saying, we'll take your money no matter what your numbers are. Give us money, we're going to give it to our students. You're being considered though, right? You're applying to their school, you'll be read. But if somebody has what would have been a 15 MCAT and a 2.4, is that really fair to take their money? Now I understand if that's you, if you have a 15 and 2.4, you may think, but I want to be considered anyway. Okay, so that's when I would say we need to have a conversation about what are some strategies in terms of how you spend your money right now. Because there are probably some better ways we can spend your money if you're spending $1,000. If they're screening, it's because they're ethical and they're set bars and they know we honestly won't accept anyone below these numbers. So if they have a 3.0 as a threshold for screening for the SUP, they probably know it's going to be very unlikely that they will accept below a 3.0. And I think that that's fair, to be honest about that.
Is that publicized? Which schools
Yes.
do that?
Well, I don't have a list.
Okay.
I don't have a list, but as soon as you hit submit, if you're not verified and you get SUPs, that's what's going on. Some will just send it out automatically. If you know you're complete, your letters are in, your MCAT's in, you can go ahead and submit it. Because then as soon as your application comes into them, you will be complete already. Don't be mad at the schools if they're not in a rush to send you SUPs. Again, you're working on their timeline. You can't expect to change the school's practices and policies. Nor should you ask the schools to make exceptions to their policies for you. Other questions? Yes.
Where would you recommend looking for scholarships that would help pay for tuition?
For medical school, well, you can start with the wonderful thing Google, and you can put in medical school scholarships. You can go to the medical school's websites and see if they have individual scholarships that they offer incoming students. Most med schools, if you have any level of need, will offer you need-based aid. If you are applying to state schools, it's going to be limited. They're going to be giving you mostly loans. Private schools are more likely to give you money. So if you're a competitive applicant with high numbers and you apply to a private school, there's a chance you'll get merit scholarship. If you are a student who's coming in with a high level of financial need and you apply to a private school, there's a good chance you're going to get need-based aid. It could be both. You could get both. They tend to give out need-based aid first and then back it up with merit if needed. So private will give you money, public not as much money. You'll pay with loans. In terms of scholarships though, I don't personally have a list of scholarships for medical school. I think it's 45,000 applications and probably all 45,000 people would want a scholarship. So I think it's a little scarce. Other questions? My honest advice about money is, this is going to sound bad because I'm not the one paying for it, but I've seen it happen over and over. I would not let money, how much the school costs, guide your decision to apply or not. Let them accept you, and let them make the decision how they're going to help you go there. If they accept you, that's a huge thing. To be accepted to medical school is huge, right? You've overcome one of the biggest obstacles in period. I think going to med school is honestly one of the hardest things to do in the country. So if you get accepted, you've done something amazing. So let them deal with your financial situation. If they said they're willing to take you, they should be willing to pay for you if you can't pay for it yourself. Don't worry about the money right now. What you need to be worrying about is how much it's going to cost you to fill out AMCAS and how much all those 25 SUPs are going to cost you. So if you apply to 25 schools, you're spending what? $50 to $100 per SUP. Now, does everybody know about fee assistance programs? So if you don't know about fee assistance programs, go Google, wonderful thing, AAMC FAP. It opens up, I believe, you want to be looking at it around January. Fill it out, submit it. If you qualify, it will pay for it. It'll give you discounted MCAT materials. It'll give you a discounted MCAT. It discounts your AMCAS, and it waives your SUPs. So if you think you have any chance of qualifying, I would strongly recommend looking into it. Yes, sir.
What did you say? The
FAP, Fee Assistance Program. And all the health professions have this, so osteopathic, I don't know if podiatric has it, but AAMC has it very robust. But you have to apply early. You can't apply when you're applying. Yes?
So like how early would you apply for this?
I would look at it by January of the year before. So look at it before you take your MCAT, because if you qualify, you get the discounted MCAT.
Since the SUPs are sent like from medical school specifically, how do they transfer the FAP to the supplementary?
They connect. So their
Okay.
application system, usually if you're FAP, they won't even charge you. It's already in the system that you're
Okay.
FAP, so the SUP won't ask you to pay. It'll just move you through that process. Some of the less developed schools technologically may have a more complicated process, but most you're going to find when you get into the SUP process, you may see that a lot of the supplemental apps look very similar. It's because there's this big company out there that does this processing for med schools. Last time I checked, there were like 35 med schools using it, and they were a lot of the big name schools. So it's very easy. It's what I used. It makes it very easy for the students. Other questions? Yes?
This is just my personal situation. I haven't taken physics. I'm going to take physics this year. And I plan to apply next summer.
Okay.
When should I take the MCAT? Should I study beforehand?
You should take the MCAT when you've completed all your coursework, so including biochemistry. I would not recommend taking the MCAT missing any content.
So I should take the MCAT in the summer, the same summer that I am applying next summer then?
If you do that, I would, when will you be done with physics? Like what month?
May.
So maybe schedule, let's see, when, are you going to be studying for the MCAT simultaneously?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe a June and you'll get your score in July.
Okay.
That would be okay.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I just want to throw this up there. I am doing this summer a pre-med boot camp on campus. If you're in Davis, around Davis at 1 o'clock, you're free. You're welcome to come. They're open. You don't have to register. The seats fill up, but if there are seats, you're welcome to come. Typically, the rooms had about 10 seats open. So, yeah, that's up there. I'm trying to cover. I have a lot of people from UC Davis Medical School and North State. Anybody heard of North State? The new medical school in Elk Grove? So I went over to visit North State. I wanted to check it out for myself. I figure I like to know before I start recommending things to people. And I didn't see any, it didn't raise any red flags with me being a new school. I think for me personally, it's a problem-based learning school. Everybody knows about problem-based learning, right? Okay, I want you to write that down and Google that if you're not sure what I mean by that. That's huge. That's a huge thing you need to know because it's going to be a big factor in where you hopefully apply and when you go to interview. You need to know that. They do problem-based learning. They're in Elk Grove. They're affiliated with Sutter and Kaiser. They have a pharmacy school, so they're doing what's called intra-professional education, which means that some of the classes will have both medical and pharmacy students in them, which I think is great. For me, the only catch is the location. To me, the location wasn't ideal for young people going to med school, but if you want to be in Northern California, you want to go to med school in California, wonderful opportunity for you. Any questions about that? But they're coming on campus to talk on July 8th. So the director of admissions is coming to interview them. All right. Oh, and I have Dr. Acosta coming on July 20th. This is going to be really big. I don't know, have you heard him speak before? He is fantastic. He's the Vice Chancellor for Diversity and Inclusion. He is in charge of making sure the entire health system is diverse. Residents, doctors, the whole works. So, really, really inspiring guy. I think he'd be wonderful to hear and get you going on this journey. All right, so I guess we have a few minutes. I have this activity. I'm going to take these. If you can just take them and pass them down. We're going to do an interview activity. I have some interview questions that I took. I might have borrowed from the medical school before I left. So I don't know if I have enough, but if not, we'll just. So everybody take one, pass them back if you have extras.
I was just looking if they all.
Oh.